Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome to the first video of part 3 of Liber ABA Magic Book 4. This is Magic in Theory and Practice, and we're going to begin, well, at the beginning. I'm skipping Hymn to Pan, which is at the very beginning of Magic in Theory and Practice. But if you want to talk about that poem/invocation, much like I gave for Liber Israfil, yeah, I'd be happy to do so, as I've in the past written a full line-by-line commentary on the hymn as an invocation. So you could comment and let me know if I should make that for you or not. So, what is magic? There are a few quotes before Crowley begins writing. So to start off, to quote the Lesser Key of Solomon at the beginning of this intro, magic, it is the, quote, highest, most absolute, and most divine knowledge about natural philosophy. And magicians who practice this art understand the most inward and occult virtue of things, end quote. Whereby, like scientists, they can know the effect of their experiments, which to the unenlightened seems fully miraculous. Crowley's definition of magic has been uttered ad nauseum, but I shall regurgitate it again for the sake of this talk. Magic, the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will, i.e., if you do certain things will happen. Let's look at the opening of this introduction, which then quotes Fraser from his writings in The Golden Bow. Magic, quote, is identical with that of modern science, end quote, and underlying magic is faith. Not the faith of lay Christians who take fairy tales as history and claim if they believe strongly enough then it will be so. No, rubbish. Show me their form of faith if they eat cyanide believing it to be maple syrup. No, faith like that of scientists, who can, by faith, reproduce the outcomes of their experiments every single time. Example, we have faith that each day the sun will rise in the east because it happens every day. Thus, our experience backs it up. But more, there is a deeper understanding in this type of faith. We have examined the stars with advanced telescopes and satellites for centuries and know that the sun rises in the east because of the trajectories and spin of the Earth and Milky Way galaxy. That unless a very large meteor struck our planet, throwing us out of orbit, our faith should not be shaken. Thus, we can say that by our knowledge of the circumstances of our solar system, we have faith that tomorrow the sun will rise in the east. Crowley translated the Key of the Mysteries by Eliphas Levi, outlining how science and faith work together and are not the enemies that the Vatican have made them out to be. And I suggest that you read that text if you have not. Keep in mind that if I mention faith ever in regards to the occult, it is a faith aligned with science and not fancy. For many years, magic has been called devilry, and witches were accused of getting their powers from a perverse demon they sold their souls to. Rubbish again. The magician owes none for their power, and it is their own. We all come from the Absolute, and the powers we possess as magicians stem from our divine nature and study of the subtle forces within and without. If we work a spell, it is by thought forms carried through the astral light that our goals are generally carried out. Theurgy, whereby an entity is invoked into oneself, is only one branch of magic among many. If one calls upon a low spirit to carry out their desires, well, one could just as easily save themselves the trouble and do the thing themselves by their own powers. Not to say that there isn't value in the Solomonic art. There is, and one can grow spiritually through the Lemegeton, but that is besides the point I'm making. So, saying we worship Satan is wrong in the way they use it. If I worship Satan, it is because I consider the biblical God of the people as a tyrant and murderous maniac. But further, from where I stand, I see no difference between Yahushua, Yod-He Shin Vav-He, and Satan. The God who slaughters his own worshippers perhaps is the real devil. Crowley writes in many a place that a devil that could oppose God has union and is a god unto itself anyway. So their whole philosophy in the Roman Catholic Church and other movements is mostly just insane. Back to the powers of the magician. Quote, yet his power, great as he believes it to be, is by no means arbitrary and unlimited. He can wield it only so long as he strictly conforms to the rules of his art, or to what may be called the laws of nature as conceived by him. To neglect these rules, to break these laws in the smallest particular, is to incur failure, and may even expose the unskillful practitioner himself to the utmost peril." End quote. No one is all-powerful. There are laws of physics just like there are laws to magic. Both must be followed. If one performs ritual magic, they must have all of the details fine-tuned towards the end goal, and anything not in harmony with the end can and will cause unforeseen events. Just as in science, all variables must be reduced as much as possible, so that if something other than your goal is attained, you can attribute the accident to the correct part of the operation if you go back and check your work. And now we move on to Crowley's portion of this introduction. He gives several arguments to state that magic is for all, a postulate, lists 28 theorems with commentary, and finally an outro. For space and time, I will not list or comment on all of them. I will select what is most important and add my own thoughts from other literature as may be necessary to fully understand the concept of magic, especially from the point of Thelema. To paraphrase, the word magic has connotations from the millennia, and in the face of scientific solemnity, and taboo impressed upon witches by the Vatican and Bible, the term has been corrupted. It attracts, quote, "too many dilettanti and eccentrics, weaklings seeking in magic an escape from reality," end quote. Let's correct that. Regardless of what your thoughts are about magic, as you will see, you do it and cannot help but do it, so you had better be good at it. Anytime you take a premeditated action with a specific goal in mind, you are doing magic. Crowley states that he is writing now for people of many specific trades, which he lists, and out of the many available titles, he chose the term magic because it is, quote, "the most sublime and actually the most discredited of all the available terms," end quote. Further, that he wills to rehabilitate the term, to, quote, "compel mankind to respect, love, and trust that which they scorned, hated, and feared," end quote. That by defining magic in this introduction, he will cleanse the term so that, quote, "all may understand instantly that their souls, their lives, in every relation with every other human being in every circumstance, depend upon magic and the right comprehension and right application thereof," end quote. Definition. Again, quote, "magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will," end quote. He gives an example, but first let me say, as we shall see in his Theorems, magic is not always performed in a towel robe, in a temple, in a magical circle, with prayers to call to incorporeal entities, or by casting spells, or using astrology. No. By the above definition, magic can and often is much more mundane in appearance, yet still causes phenomenon in its own right. Pause this video and read his example now, if you will. Postulate. Quote, "any required change may be effected by the application of the proper kind of degree of force in the proper manner through the proper medium to the proper object," end quote. You could pause the screen now to see the example he gives about this postulate. Any object is capable of X number of functions. 2 hydrogen molecules mixed under the correct pressure with 1 oxygen molecule creates water. A block of wood can become a statue by carving it properly. By invoking Mercury, one can improve their ability to read, comprehend, speak publicly, etc., as is within the powers of Mercury to bestow. For fighting a war, one would invoke Mars, not Mercury. So in magic, be it ritual or otherwise, you must know all of the functions of that which you work with, isolate the variables, and perform experiments. You must keep a strict journal, not only for yourself, but with the idea to help mankind. We are scientists, and we are performing the great work not just for our own benefit, but to benefit the entire human species. Next up are some of his 28 theorems. We begin, quote, "every intentional act is a magical act. Every successful act has conformed to the postulate. Every failure proves that one or more requirements of the postulate have not been fulfilled," end quote. These first 3 theorems are self-explanatory, as I've just above described what is written here. Quote, number 4, The first requisite for causing any change is thorough qualitative and quantitative understanding of the conditions." End quote. Like I said, you must know exactly what you are working with. When performing the great work, you are taking up the process of alchemy upon yourself, to turn your base matter of lead into gold. To do this, you must know yourself absolutely, and must determine your exact course in life, i.e. your true will. Here's a little side addendum. Not every magician is practicing the great work. Not every person who practices magic is a Thelemite. Not every Thelemite practices magic, at least intentionally, or with the proper forethought. I make a big distinction later on in this, but I just wanted to put that there first and foremost. How many people take up a field in college and then are miserable or terrible at their job later on? It happens every day. When they are performing the great work, they should already know what their field of expertise is and is not, so that no time in their life is wasted. Further, they will benefit the entire species by determining what they should be doing. Money is not the goal. It is a byproduct for survival, period. But our current society prizes money as the goal, and how we make it second. And I say that this is utterly backwards. The magical diary and yoga are your best friends. See Liber Eve. Now let's see 6 and 7. Quote, "Every man and every woman is a star. Every man and every woman has a course depending partly on the self and partly on the environment, which is natural and necessary for each. Anyone who is forced from his own course, either through not understanding himself or through external opposition, comes into conflict with the order of the universe and suffers accordingly." End quote. I'm going to put an addendum on that, even though there's a direct quote from Liber ABA. Every man, woman, and intermediately sexed person. Let's go with that. We cannot do anything outside of what we are doing now. We cannot alter the past, and the future will be the result of our actions in the present. This external present is our course as a star. Through the finest self-knowledge, we could determine exactly how the present is best used. No more mere guessing based on sensory pleasures or doing what we think we should based on family or any external pressure to perform. No, we are free, and that freedom comes with the responsibility of finding out exactly what our course is and riding it accordingly. Failure to do so, or denying our own truth, will do nothing except cause misery to ourselves and those we come into contact with. To wish otherwise from our course is to seek to swerve. Thus, it will cause suffering. Quote number 9. "A person doing their true will has the inertia of the universe to assist them." End quote. This is true for magicians. The universe itself is conscious. We are not ants begging the almighty finger not to squish us. Nuid and Hadid are of us, or rather we are of them, and thus once you find your true will, it is guaranteed that your path will be cleared for you, that you may walk with absolutely no disturbance whatsoever. I'm going to quote from Liber L, chapter 1, verses 42 to 45. Quote, "Let it be that state of manyhood, bound in loathing, so with thy all, thou hast no right but to do thy will. Do that, and no other shall say nay. For pure will, unassuaged of purpose, delivered from the lust of result, is every way perfect. The perfect and the perfect are one perfect, and not two, nay, are none." End quote. These lines tell us exactly what I just said prior. The universe and ourselves are all one state of union. Do your will, and no other shall say nay, i.e., the universe or any being therein will not, nay, cannot stop you. Theorems 10 to 13 define limitations and the endless possibilities of the human condition. So I'm going to skip past those. You should read them for yourself. 14, quote, "People are capable of being and using anything which they perceive, for everything which they perceive is in a certain sense a part of their being. They may subjugate the whole of the universe of which they are conscious to their individual will." End quote. If you read Duty by Aleister Crowley, there he outlines in what ways we are responsible for the universe. We are above the minerals, vegetation, and animals. We are capable of tinkering with any forces of nature before us, but we are responsible for everything that we do. Moving on, 15, quote, Every force in the universe is capable of being transformed into any other kind of force by using suitable means. There is thus an inexhaustible supply of any particular kind of force that we may need." End quote. 0 equals 2. Crowley writes elsewhere that the Taoist understood that anything soever can be created by drawing from the Tao, the no thing, or veils beyond the tree of life, and turning energy into matter. By scientific terms, E equals mc squared. We know that by physics that matter nor energy can be destroyed, they merely change forms. By the proper, let's call it leverage. By the proper leverage, we can manifest anything soever into any other thing within the means it is capable of becoming, as stated in the postulate. Theorems 16 to 18 are more bylaws about forces, straightforward, and you must read them for your own self. Let's look at Theorems 22 to 24 as a grouping. Quote, "Every individual is essentially sufficient to themselves, but they are unsatisfactory to themselves until they have established themselves in the right relation with the universe. Magic is the science of understanding oneself and one's conditions. It is the art of applying that understanding in action. Every person has an indefeasible right to be what they are." End quote. Here comes a very important distinction that I've been longing to make. Liber ABA instructs us that, quote, "the law is for all," end quote. Magic and the great work are two separate things. I am adamant about never pushing a person into practicing magic. I wish everyone would, but I never will attempt to persuade. I offer Liber ABA in the Book of the Law and leave it at that if they are disinterested. To take up the great work is not only time-consuming and something that must come from within, it is full of dangers and hazardous to the unprepared. To push someone into practicing magic is like pushing a new person into mountain climbing Everest. Without proper training and study, they will not make it, and they could be hurt or perished in the ascent. Magic, as stated, is every willed intent made action. And even though everybody does it, not all are prepared to do it in the way of the great work, or in the way of the magician. Some, in this incarnation, may need the rest of a mundane life. That is up to each person to judge for themselves, so no spiritual pride should ever be an issue for a magician who is in communication with a person who is not working on their spirituality. No one ever knows another's karma better than they can themselves, so no one should ever judge another person's decisions for their own being, especially if they are not in a situation where that person is impressing their will upon them. So, the average person can live by Liber ABA. Correction. They will be confronted by existence itself with the law that governs them, whether they accept that fact or not. Then, there is the class of people who may be aware of magic, but if they are not sworn by oath to perform the great work, they are not bound by the immediate karma for abusing the art, such as the initiate will be. Thus, they are freer to make decisions and actions that oath-bound magicians are not. They will still have karma for any and all thoughts and actions, but it may not swoop in and balance out as fast as it does for the Magi. Still, they are bound by the same universal laws, but are not self-imposed to live up to them as is the magician. Then there are the oaths taken by the initiated, who are then bound by the tenets of their respective orders they belong to, and the oaths of their stations. It is especially AA disciples who must be ever more careful while performing magic, and this class I believe wholeheartedly must use magic for service to humanity before all else. They are barred from profit motive, and like the above theorems state, they are to learn everything possible about their own being and the universe so that they may use magic for the penultimate purpose of union with the highest. However, they are seeking that union with the subtext that demands they do their work to aid others. So, while they are most certainly beholden to themselves, much like the Satanist, they are beholden so that they may give back to the next person. By changing themselves, they change the universe. At the very least, if their will is not to be of service in the fullest sense of the word, then at least they should pass around the law to those who would have it for themselves. For the more who embrace the law, the less there will be to infringe upon their will later on. Further, we are each who we are. To deny that core of oneself is to commit the gravest sin against the divine, of whom each person is an expression. To deny another person's affirmation of who they know themselves to be is as bad, if not worse. It is always ludicrous. It is impossible to know everything about one external to oneself. And even if a person is wrong about their identity, in a way, it is a disservice to them to deny their ability to make mistakes. They may need to make a mistake and go down a wrong path to suddenly realize that they are otherwise than they thought they were. Without allowing them to make that mistake about their identity, you may end up inadvertently causing them twice or more time until they realize who they actually are as an individual. And lastly, on these 22 to 24, the magician must know the universe as well as they know themselves. Then, they can calculate their place in the universe with its infinite occurrences happening every second. They are to know they are a pinprick in the universe so that ego does not rule them, yet have the utmost respect for themselves as they would God, for, again, they are an expression of the infinite experiencing itself. Quote 25. Every person must do magic each time they act or think, since a thought is an internal act whose influence ultimately affects action, though it may not do so at the time. End quote. Abracadabra, I create as I speak. Look at Liber ABA, verse 9, quote, a man is what he maketh himself within the limits fixed by his inherited destiny. He is a part of mankind. His actions affect not only what he calleth himself, but the whole universe. End quote. I take it like this. Around oneself are tons and tons of particles. To make any motion is to shift all of those particles in the air around oneself. How those tiny particles, once shifted, go on to affect larger and larger things as they rearrange and connect with other particles over time is much too much for one person to calculate in the enormity of space-time. But it is so. Where this only applies within the Earth's atmosphere and not in the vacuum of space, that is still a lot of changes caused by any movement. But to go deeper into this concept, what we do is permanently imprinted upon the astral realm. Any one action permanently affects the entire evolution of the universe. That is what is meant in the Egyptian Book of the Dead when it tells us that all is imprinted in the Book of Life forever. This is the metaphysics of the Akashic record. But the theorem is even more demanding. It states that even thought must be considered as an action, thus capable of causing karma. Thought is the beginning of action. If one has not absolute control of their mind, and has not mastered themselves in this minutest of way, then the untrained mind will inevitably prove ultimately hazardous to themselves or their orbit, i.e. their true will. The unconscious mind has a way of provoking action, especially actions one is not aware are stemming from the unconscious mind. We close with the last three theorems, which are simple. Each person has the absolute right to self-preservation. As we cannot avoid doing magic, then magic should be the keystone of each person's life. Those two are straightforward enough. And finally, every person has the right to do their will, whether or not they fear it may affect another. This at first seems selfish, but is calculated. The final sentence of the final theorem states, quote, for if he is in his proper place, it is the fault of others if they interfere with him, end quote. So, if two people are both magicians, and each are sure they are doing their will, and yet they crash, it can be because of only a handful of reasons. The best and most logical reasons that come to my mind for such a crash would be these. One of them has miscalculated their will. Both have miscalculated their will. Or more interesting to consider, both have rightly calculated their will, but have crashed because of the current state of the human species and the way our unenlightened system is currently operating, which has caused the two or more people into conflict. Regardless, a collision of stars should lead to deep introspection, and much good can still come from a confrontation, especially if both parties remain civilized and are willing to communicate after they have withdrawn and undergone introspection. This introduction to magic in theory and practice ends with the summation and statement of purpose of the author and chief rehabilitator of magic. Quote, I hope that the above principles will demonstrate to all that their welfare, their very existence, is bound up in magic. I trust that they will understand not only the reasonableness, but the necessity of the fundamental truth which I was the means of giving to mankind. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I trust that they will assert themselves as individually absolute, that they will grasp the fact that it is their right to assert themselves, and to accomplish the task for which their nature fits them. Yea, more, that this is their duty, and that not only to themselves but to others, a duty founded upon universal necessity. Magic is simple enough in all conscience. It is not otherwise with the art of government. The aim is simply prosperity. The sincere student will discover behind the symbolic technicalities of this book a practical method of making himself a magician." End quote. Magic is simple once you have grasped its meaning and fully understand what it means to be a magician. It is only practical, and you are doing it constantly, albeit perhaps poorly if you are unaware of that which you do. In this part of Book 4, Magic in Theory and Practice, we will explore the art from many a perspective and various forms of it, so that you will have in your armamentarium the knowledge to wield your weapons bespoke of in Part 2 previously. I am ecstatic to take this journey with you. Love is the law, love under will.